fairness is interesting as of a word, right? Fairness. And how fair everything is, and your fair skin and your fair. Shut up. It's not about that. This isn't a melting pot. We're all just people. Like, you're not the parents disseminating out equal rights to everybody. Like, at some point, there has to be that acknowledgement. And I think we're getting there. But it's, it's trying not to demonize people who do wrong things. That's in that whiteness, and thinking that that's going to happen to you if you do something wrong.
Not sure if we have a topic today, but I talked about Nation of Islam on my channels this week.
Did you? Oy, okay.
I did.
Okay, how did that go?
It's going okay. It's going okay. I'm
Okay.
continually reminding myself that conflict is not bad. So first of all, like, the first reaction was just people being like, thank you for talking about them. Like, definitely, is one of the kind of accepted cults. But since most cult people are white American scholars, people don't really want to touch it. But so anyway, going back and forth with that, right? When I first started talking about cults, and someone was asking me to look at the Divine Nine, and people were like, no, black people were like, we don't want to hear you talk about that.
Right.
However, with, I think, things like Nation of Islam, Nubian Nation, these are cults. These follow the same patterns, right? And most experts have said all cults are ultimately the same. And I mean, when we read in Cult Book Club, Jamelia Chisholm's The Community about Nubian Nation and like growing up in one of their communes. And I've never read anything that described my childhood better, including my own book, than like that experience. So, and then there are people that are saying thank you, right? And it's kind of like the cult baby story is the same.
Right.
And this is kind of where I'm going with, first of all, we can look at patterns, but also we judge groups by listening to their ex-members and, to many, many descriptions of how it is. I know what I know about Nation of Islam from talking to survivors of it as much as from, reading things that mostly white academics have written about it.
Right. And once you realize also that their foundation is patriarchal, then at its core, there is going to end up being the groupthink and that one person decides, the truth and the way forward. It's going to end up culty. And I think that focusing and centering on the experience of the most vulnerable, of course, Fran is going to get all active now, the most vulnerable people. Hold on. Fran, hey, meow. Okay, sorry. Then you can kind of be a good person to have that conversation.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, I've said this about all cults, like, you need people who understand your exact version of it, which of course is not going to be me. But then you also need people that understand that don't understand it, but understand like the larger challenges. I mean, it's very similar about working with veterans, right? Like, if you're not a veteran, like, there's just a part of the experience you're just not going to understand, right? And certainly there's stuff about the Nation of Islam that I will never be able to understand. But
you're not speaking for them. You're speaking for the experience, and when you're saying cult baby, that is how you can mitigate any kind of harm from existing as a white woman having this conversation, is bringing it back to that always, and not centering the facts of it is a cult, period. That's now what we're having a conversation about. It's like, no, it's these people identify with my experience, and so I am going to have that conversation.
Kind of one of the ultimate points that I made was that, yes, people that study cults are white American scholars for the most part,
Yeah.
right? Like that is absolutely part of the conversation. However, every cult scholar, and especially those of us who grew up in them, say that like it doesn't matter what you call it.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what I see on my side. It's like, well, if my content about growing up in an extreme cult speaks to you,
Yeah.
right? Or if my list, like that's why I made my list to be
Mm-hmm.
as a tool,
It's like, does
because
it fit?
because there's no, everyone thinks there's like some deity who names cults, and it's like that's the media, and that is done when we can measure the damage in bodies.
And that's the cultiness of your thinking. Your cultability is in looking for dad to tell you what is the truth. It's like you always comes down to like, but who is your dad? I realize like there's a lot of that. And if there is that answer, then if there is some worse written word dictionary, something you're going to go to decide what the truth is, that isn't just, well, this makes sense. And I've seen this and I heard this and this aligns. No kind of
Yeah.
self-agency
And
and acknowledgement. Oof.
and I also just think that like being a cult baby in this field, like I kind of hate every definition, including my own, because
Yeah.
again, there's more to it.
Yeah.
And especially once we acknowledge single family cults and one cults, like
Right.
most people are never going to get what I have, which is the validity of the world being like, yes, that was a cult.
Mm-hmm. The
Right.
believing you, which is itself, a part of the problem. But with
Mm-hmm.
that privilege that you have, you are going to wield it to help others feel that same assuredness with yours. It's like that is your privilege at work, and
Yep.
that makes sense to me.
Yep.
And also the definition, right, is so white coded, so like defining is always in hindsight anyway, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
helpful as long as
Mm-hmm.
it isn't dynamic. But that's worship of the written word.
Yeah.
I've been telling I said it once, but in my head I've been saying like be, don't d, right? Don't, instead of decentering men, it doesn't matter if it's in the center, if it's the only thing on the page, right? So it's, don't decenter men, just be about yourself, right? Because when you're still focused on demonizing these people, but defining is another one. Denying, defending, all of these are just still centering that thing that you are claiming not to be worthy, but you have limited attention, and that is an actual resource. So I'm glad, and the Divine Nine is such an interesting, and I'm kind of glad you didn't go into Divine Nine, because that is very, it comes from the lineage of white supremacy, yes, but it's almost like how there was a Black beauty pageant because Black people weren't allowed. It
Right.
was still a
Right.
different thing.
And
It's
see, so even that, I think it's interesting looking at Black Panthers versus Nation of Islam
right,
or Hebrew
right, right.
Israelites, right? Where it's like this was a resistance movement, a social movement.
Yep.
There was probably a lot of culty stuff that we talk about, right? Like
Yeah,
we
were
see
men
that
there? Like,
everywhere. Yeah. And in part because these movements are a response to
right.
real things in society.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I find for me as like the scholar to be really interesting, right? Because when we look at white cults in America, most of the persecution is made up, right? Or it's like,
Yeah.
no, like they're
Yeah.
after you because you're raping children,
Yeah.
right? But we know that when people are feeling persecuted, right, they are willing to do up everything to, including commit violence, like on behalf of their in-group. And
Yep.
so I think it's really relevant that any kind of demographic intersectionality can be used to recruit you. And so when we see, very
Mm-hmm.
significantly the 30s and then the 60s are when some of these big cults come up, and like the message that white America hates you is true, right? The
Right.
us versus them is
Easy. Yeah.
true.
It's right there.
They
Yeah.
are out there trying to get you, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
best thing that ever happened to Castro was Bay of Pigs, right? Because then he was like, yeah, America is out to get us, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know
It was a real thing. I think America was on the wrong side, but like when America invaded and tried to mess around in Cuban politics,
got it,
to try to keep Cuba from going communist. That was like that was the best thing that ever happened to Castro, because he could be for the
it was
rest
like,
of time
see,
like,
yeah,
look, see, they're out to get us. But unfortunately, even though, you know, Nation of Islam has this important place in Black culture, I think,
yeah,
like, we
yeah.
still see all the same patterns. We still see the trafficking of labor. We still see him with the young girls, you know.
I mean,
just
yeah, patriarchy is still, you know, can still, it's like, you know, we talk about white women, and it's like Black men are our next thing. It's just when in my conversations, I'm not going to, you know, and that's where intersection is hard for me, you
maybe
know.
this is Black men are the white women of women.
Yeah,
We went,
of Black people or something like
or,
that. Yeah,
yeah,
you're the
that's what I
white
meant.
women. You're the white women of
Black
Black
men are the
people.
white women.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, they're the men of Black people, so like it's that too.
Yeah.
So it's like they're men, right? And people, and I think that's what dehumanization does. And because when you talk about people in general, the dehumanization is including and ignoring Black people in that, right? You get the plausible deniability of, in hindsight, going, well, yeah, we're talking about Black men too. And then you adjust whatever you're thinking. No, you weren't, but you don't realize you weren't. Because it's just like there was so much actually done in language of saying, you know, in this accident, there were this many men, this many women, and this many Negroes, not saying men and women, right? Saying, separating purposefully. But then when you just stop saying, and the Negroes part, now it's like, well, we're talking about everybody. And you never did that.
And this is part of, I feel like, has been my lesson, right? So like, first of all, when I wrote my book, Uncultured, like the high school counselor who saves my life, who puts me on the path that changes everything, was a Black woman. And I was like, how do I say that? Because I want people to know that. Because if I don't say it, we're going to assume that she's white, right? And I have
White
found,
people would, I think, maybe. I wonder
yeah,
about Black women.
well, because you have that
you
default, you have
yeah.
that default whiteness, they call it, right? So if I'm writing the book and I don't call it out,
Yeah.
and I mean, I reached out to a Black woman author that I really respect, and she gave me, you know, two pieces of advice on how to do it and how to call attention to it. But
because I would too. Like I would include people's race because it matters.
Yeah. And
but
I
not like
also,
that
but
matters.
so then I've also tried to navigate that as a cult scholar. You know, at first it was like people were like, we don't want you talking about Black groups. And I was like, okay, you know, like I'm going to sit and listen.
That's safer.
But now, you know, but then when I started to have a lot more Black people following me and saying, can you do this one? Can you talk about this one? Right. And like, what's the difference of talking about Jehovah's Witnesses because they're white led, but they're super heavily filled with Black people versus, right? And so it's like, I don't want to just be like, oh, I don't talk about Black groups, because then that is also not the correct answer. Right. And I think what it comes down to is just that it is a complicated situation, and that's what I do, and that's what I keep telling myself. Like,
you have all this
conflict is
time
not bad.
Yeah.
I went and turned off the comments, and I was like, no, what? Like,
yeah,
I turned off the comments because the responses that I'm getting are just cult responses, right? Like, no, it's not. It's all the same stuff that I see.
It's really,
so just like,
it's hard to.
I don't want to deal with it, and I was going to turn it off, and then I swear, like, Rebecca popped up in my head and was like, conflict is not bad.
Yeah, right. It's like it would be easier to not talk about Black groups, and in an organization, it would be safer not to talk about Black groups. Safer for whomst, you know, safer for whom and why, because you can prove, you know, that you can exist in the conflict, but the answers, because even when I brought up, you know, the bear scenario and that white women were the men of women, the culty responses, and I got triggered, right? And I have to work on that. But that's where it's like, don't defend, don't define, don't do, because those things are hindsight. It does not help. And it's only going to, you have limited time and energy and attention and self-control. And it leads you into this irritable, defensive, like prepared for statements. So now someone who sounds just like all the other cult members, because you've just heard this so many times, they may not be as aggressive as you feel like they're being. But anyway, that's the whole thing about creating content. I don't know.
I'm guilty of that, right? Like, I'm guilty of snapping back at people, and then like, so for example, I did a thing about MAGA saying that like the cult leader is not easily replaceable, right? And so then I just got so many, well, Scientology, gotcha, right? And I was like, at some point I just got so upset that I snapped back at people, but then I look at my response just to that one person, and it definitely does. I'm like, oh gosh, no, like that is really snippy. But I would say on the other side of that, though, like I do feel like I can take on this conversation about this, because I know that I have I have no ill intentions towards the Black community, that I'm trying to unpack this stuff, that part of acknowledging up front, like part of the conversation is that people that look like me are the ones that talk about this the most.
Right.
You know,
and if someone's going to do
it,
you have me as a part of your community. You have these conversations every week. That is a part of your resources. You are resourced in this, in having me in your head to do that. And that's what Black women do. I get that from the existence of this work that came before me. And that's all that's what I aim to do, is just provide white women with, but you can't do that without me, in a way, like without the existence of a community that will push back on the ease way and the safe, meaning safe from people being mad at you.
Yeah.
And like, maybe they'll be mad at you.
I also think this is part of it, right? It's like, this book that I'm working through right now, White Women Get Ready. That's like, it's written by a white woman for white women, but none of that would be possible without like all of these Black writers and thinkers that she has studied on her journey that led her to be able to like put this book together. But I do think there's a point, and I feel like as society we're getting to that point now, where like white women need to call each other in and be like, no, do this. Like, this is what we've learned. This is what,
like, okay, now that we know this stuff about ourselves, let's talk about this and make this more like, there are specific conversations white women can be having about white womanhood, but it's just not going to sound like conversations that have been had before. And you're not prepared. You're not given that go ahead or something, permission from dad to do it.
Well, it's kind of this cult survivor thing again, right? Like, we don't know how to be like normal humans in the real world without like listening to Black women and diverse voices and all of this stuff. But we are the ex-cult members of the cult of white supremacy and white womanhood, and like we can go get our own people.
That was always what
even when you haven't done all the work yet, like you can always go get your own people and be like, hey, it's a cult.
Yeah, be like, hey, did you know? Like, it's just something, because you're not supposed to only talk when you that's what the white men do, and they just pretend the whole time. They just have strong opinions or whatever. You showing that vulnerability first to say, oh my gosh, did you, it's human to human. It's not teacher to student, because you're both white women. For me, it's not the same. I'm not having the same conversation. That white woman listened to Black women when that Black woman shared her experiences with them. I watch videos of Black women going, a white woman complimented me on my hair today, and all she said was, that looks gorgeous. It was great. Like, all she said, and I know that so well. I understand. And all I want to do is share with white women, hey, if you want a compliment, don't think you have to, right? I think avoid it, because we're just like, this is what happens, right? That wasn't she shared it because it was like, she didn't say, I'm jealous, any. After, the relating is too close. Relate to your fellow white women. Don't relate. We're not related. We don't have related experiences. That's not how we're connected. We're not, relating is for relatives. That doesn't mean we can't have respect for each other and have a community with each other. I think there is a space as women to have community, but not if you're going to come in and demand, I think we're the same.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's not at all what
But
we do over here.
it's even the thing we were saying about like the fiber arts versus specifying, knitting supremacy or whatever. It's
Yeah.
just like, just knowing that the person is going to be uncomfortable even for a little bit, I think should make you like shift your behavior. And, I had this experience with asking people, where are you from? Or I should say, asking people with accents, where are you from?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And because I grew up abroad, because I don't fit in, because I'm not what I look like, and because I know I love to talk about other countries.
Yeah.
Like for all these reasons, I used to always like, whenever I was talking to someone with an accent, I'm like, oh my gosh, where are you from? And then I started to notice that like, especially Europeans, but all kinds of people are like, like standing back. And, one of the things now I have learned, for all of those reasons, I can lead with Brazil, blah, blah, blah. Like
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
lead with something first
Yep.
that messages those things and allows them, if they want to bring up, another country that
Right.
they're from. But just
Yeah.
that experience of like, they're looking at me, an American waspy looking white woman,
Yeah.
asking them when they're from, and they're just reliving every other negative interaction they've had.
Like, is this about to be, and you being able to just take that in and not, you're centering yourself, so you're not centering yourself, right? And just taking it in, letting it digest. And that will influence how you have conversations in the future and but you can also have those conversations with white people in a state of like, it's not instruction. It's just like, it's just sharing. There isn't a hierarchy in it, but I do see white women. It's like, that's why I'm talking. It's not for the attention and for the any of that. It's I put up a sign at my desk at work that said, "Please do," or like, "Don't touch my hair." Right, but I picked a very good non-aggressive picture with like a little crown and tried to center myself. But I didn't do that so people would know. Like, I thought in my head, if they see the sign, they'll have the conversation with someone before it even comes up and I have to do something. And then that will spread. And then people will, that was my little idealistic thinking. Not like people will just be made uncomfortable or whatever. But that is the goal, that white women talk to other white women to prevent this discomfort and to like, in that, it will create more opportunities for you. Even just realizing, if I say I'm from Brazil, where like it's empathy and it's understanding, not like people shouldn't, you're not defending yourself. You don't need to do that. No one is attacking you, even when they think negatively, or
Right.
consider that you could possibly be. It's just like,
It just eventually was like, I think people are, like having that realization that I think the more I worked on my stuff and the more I hear other people talk about how problematic white people are, right? And like, you have to talk to enough minorities in America to realize that they get asked where they're from, know where are you really from, right? Like, you have to like
yeah.
learn all of that and then be like, oh,
And
this is what they
identify
think's
yourself,
happening.
yeah, as just factually, like, as you approach every stranger, you don't get the benefit of the
No.
doubt. Because
Right.
now that I think about that
And
phrase, I'm like, what is that?
from yeah, for me it was a good lesson on intent versus impact, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't matter that I'm not going there with it. It doesn't matter that these are not the reasons why, like, it doesn't. They're still having that moment of fear.
Right. And like,
Or eye rolling or exhaustion or, whatever that
whatever.
moment is.
You could have avoided that had you known, or whatever. And you can in the future. You didn't
Yep.
do anything wrong, right? And that's the whole eracism of it all. I've been really in that eracism thing, and the whiteout and the lumpy paper that you get as a result, but it has all the right things on it. You didn't say anything wrong, but everyone's uncomfortable, and you could have just turned a new sheet and then just been like, okay, I learned this thing. I don't whiteout, I think about now, just, was that even good for us? Like the paint I used to put on my nails, it smelled a little chemically. Anyway, I just like what
Remember doing nails with whiteout.
Doing my little French tip. Terrible. Looked bad. Shouldn't wasn't achieving the thing I was looking for. And it's like then I turn to tape and then it becomes to the point, do you just white out your whole I remember going through a whole white this whole thing out, except a scratchy paper and then move on to the next thing. I just wonder about some of that, the amendments and the it wasn't it wasn't really bad. It wasn't really a problem. We're just gonna move forward and we're gonna forgive and forget and we're gonna white out everything and like that's not what happened. She didn't mean it that way, or maybe that's gaslighting. Stop doing all of that. Instead, accepting the scenario that is in front of you and saying, okay, these people are Black and I'm white, but I'm hearing culty experiences. And now I'm gonna talk about how that sounds like a culty experience. Next thing. And race makes things nonsensical. It makes people nonsensical.
It's a relevant part of it, right?
Right.
But like someone's just straight out was like, she doesn't have the experience to evaluate NOI. And I'm like, Mormons say the same thing to me.
Right.
AA people say the same thing to me,
like the response almost it says that you're almost kind of making the point stronger on my end by how you defend it. Because why do you care what a random person says?
Part of the strength of what I do is I'm just like, these are the tactics, right? These are the tactics, these are the procedures.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, so specifically with like Nubian Nation, right? Like my experience listening to a book about a Black cult, which I thought there would be more differences than there were. Like
right.
It literally broke my brain how that was my exact childhood. The reasoning was different, right? Like the reasoning they give you, the mission they give you, but all of those are just flavors of difference. Like
because they're narcissist systems at the end of the day. You know how like everyone who experiences a narcissist is obviously a different set of things that ticks them off, a different whatever. But the resulting experience to the victim of it, to the person receiving that abuse, is based in the same human experiences. Like we're all humans. I don't want to give, colorblind, but at the end of the day, there are connections we're going to have. But also, the people who are bad, we can be bad in Black. Like Black women have the most to consider when existing. That doesn't mean Black women can't also be harmful. Black women can't exist in these nuanced bubbles. It's just that when Black women are talking about being a Black woman around white women, as a white person, if you are hearing from a Black woman about the experience, they're not likely lying to you. If they're asking you for something, I don't know, consider that they're also a person who might be using your easy privilege to get something out of you. Because they're people too, and we can be narcissists as well. I think it's less likely to work because consequences shape behavior, but like
but I think this is also like if we flip that around for cults, right? Like cults are always the best at just manipulating their little piece, right?
mm-hmm.
So like white cults know religious freedom and homeschooling laws like the back of their freaking hand.
Mm-hmm.
And these significant Black cults that we've seen, they know how to weaponize civil rights and us versus them and, these things to get you to care. Because ultimately all cults are just weaponizing your discontent, right? In order to like exploit your labor.
Ooh, I like that. Oh, that's interesting because, Caste is the origins of our discontents. That's the name of it.
That is my favorite book in the world.
Same. It always remains on top because it gave me so much understanding before I even understood narcissism. It was helping me understand narcissism in a way. It just the systemic use of humanity to control each other. I tried to start the book by not writing in it, and that was crazy. By the end of it, I had a whole tab system, and my pencils all. Oh my god! It's my number one recommended.
This is why I can't get books from the library anymore.
Yeah, no, I don't. What do you mean? This is, and it's okay to have a tactile experience with the book. It's like, that's how I remember it. Yeah. Sometimes I wish I could do more reading on like digital format, but I want to put my handwriting there because I'll remember something based on that. Anyway, Caste it's a Black woman writing about how these are all connected, and I feel like if she could do that, and then we're just like, but I don't know, it's really hard, and it's really like, it's a big topic. I know it's different to write a book than it is to be online.
No.
But
I just want to say, for those who don't know, in Caste, Isabel Wilkerson is connecting the Indian caste system, the Nazi caste system, and the American one-drop caste system. American racism, which was too racist for Hitler.
yeah, it's such a good book.
So good. It's
so good. And just, to me, also like helped me depersonalize what was happening to me. It felt like, this is not on you. Like, you aren't, and it's not on you to necessarily fix or understand or zoom out, right?
Yeah.
You're not special. None of this is special.
This is funny because this is so relevant to studying cult experience, right? And this is why I say, like, part of my book club is just, we read 12 cult memoirs and you understand that, like, your experience wasn't special. But also, it's group trauma, right? It's really hard to heal from group trauma if you don't understand what happened to you.
Right. And who's gonna, and white women listen to, to other white women. And I don't think that's some kind of, like, yeah, that makes sense. They look like you. That's kind of what happens. But if I'm telling you, hey, you've been, and that's kind of how I used to start it, with like showing my little picture of me as a little girl with my white mom. And I remember being like, if I do this, they will listen to me more. They will believe me more that I don't have like malicious intent, which is like, but it had to be a part of it. And what I want is for you to care enough to listen and to care about me, which feels manipulative, but it literally is just like, no, seriously, yes. I want you to know what it feels like to be around you and be betrayed in that way. Or it just,
it's almost like the credential stuff that we talk about, right? It's like you have to present, or I feel like I have to do that with Latin stuff, right? Like I have to present my Latina credentials at the door. It's like, yes, I know I look like an American white woman, but I grew up in Brazil and Mexico. I do speak Spanish and Portuguese.
Yeah. But
and then everyone's like, oh, cool, this is amazing. And I do that. Yeah. I know.
And it's
I get
much
a better,
easier
I get
that
a better
way.
response. Yeah.
We're definitely more inclusive once you're like, which, for me, it's, but then once I realized once they really heard what I was saying, to put the wall down a little bit, I was like, that has to be a culty thing. Just because there's this, you can't know what you sound like. There's like, that's what I felt like. You should do you know what it is like? And the looks we're giving each other when you leave the room, wouldn't you want to know that? And it's like, they don't even get there.
They're not there yet.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, right? Like there's always a point when people now will just say it to me. They're like, oh, I can't call it a cult yet, so I call it a high control group. And like, you can't, when people are still in the cult, you can't tell them they're in a cult, right? So like, that's the difficult part. We're always learning that we were in a cult in hindsight. And I also think that's where the defensiveness comes from, because you feel like you need to just like defend where you came from. And that's what was so interesting to me, was that like by the time I started my conscious anti-racism journey, I had already written a whole book about the cult and deconstructed the cult. And so I don't need to defend where I came from. And I just think like that's one of the only differences, which is, and nobody needs to defend where they came from.
And imagine if you didn't have to feel like someone talking to you meant you have to now get your defenses ready. What do you mean? All you got to do is listen. You literally don't have to say anything. No one is requiring you to say anything. But for some reason, white women feel like you're waiting for my like approval, agreement, that aura thing of understanding and relating, and the proof of receipt. Like, you didn't, nope. You were here. I watched you listen to me. So you don't need to not go. And that now I'm throwing it back because you think I don't know what listening looks like. And, just believing yourself.
This is where I think cults are all about performance comes into play, right? Because this is how we demonstrate that we are good little white girls. is we, Hermione ourselves up and we're like, look, I know how to do this. Like, I know how to do this.
Participation. Oh, right. Like context rich environments. Like culture is context rich. That's why Black women can have conversations without speaking and giving so much nonverbal, but like, or in the actual verbal. Some of that's because they were forced to, right? We had to speak in silence, but then at the same time, there's a happy medium where your silence is like, it's okay. Also, I was talking about like stand-up crowds. Black audiences are hard to please because we're not going to laugh to make you feel better. We're going to laugh if we're going to laugh. But in these white stand-ups, you see people just say crazy things, and if their families or something, just it's like as a gift, right? Like, I'm doing this for you. It's just, and that's bad. They need to, it may be uncomfortable for them. It's uncomfortable to be a stand-up comedian and not be funny. Yeah, it should be uncomfortable. You shouldn't feel like, well, he's trying really hard.
Yeah. Your job is to be funny. You're failing at your job. Like, you should feel weird.
Yeah, maybe next time you'll be better. Like, there's a future you don't exist in your like current moment, and that's it. But the performance, right? If you're only as good as your last deed, feels culty to me. It's like, you're doing great if you're doing great, but last week was weird, and now I don't know where I stand. This one thing happened. That happens in relationships, in jobs, in these groups, and it doesn't matter all your past.
And this also comes back to the idea of purity, right, and perfection in black and white that we get in cults, right? Because it's just like this whole idea that you're supposed to be trying to be pure and perfect all of the time. And, just going back to this conversation, I'm like, I'm going to mess things up, right? Like, I should have prefaced it by saying, of course, cults are defined by white academics, right? Like, I could have done better. Like, I will learn things in this conversation as well. And that's fine. Like, I don't have to be perfect. It also doesn't mean the knowledge that I do have is not relevant, right? So it's like, I don't need to avoid it. I feel like a year ago, I would have just avoided the whole conversation.
I may have been like, that's a good idea. Just because, because who knows if you're ready for that. And I think you are, obviously, because you're doing it. And you exercise that discomfort and engaged in it, and our experience, like, that's what this is. And you can decide anytime to stop, but this is proof that this is a choice. And so when you first said you were doing it, was like, but not like bad, but it's like, okay, let's see what this is about. I actually don't know that much about them as cults. I know Malcolm X, right? I know that they can absolutely exist in culty nature. Like, I've seen, what narcissism is in everything. So, but it's like the audience, but the avoiding the divine nine, acknowledging it and avoiding it is almost like a sign of like, okay, good. Okay. So you're using your culty, but also listening, where you're like, maybe, no, okay, yeah, right. Like, you don't exist in that purity of, you can always just be like, yeah, that was wrong. I'd rather wrong than righteous. I'd rather you try and be like, oh, it turns out you shouldn't say, like, I can't imagine what you would do that would just like make it not worth it. You're gonna say something. You're not gonna come out here and be like, N-words.
So, like, I always keep saying I'm not trying to be anything except on the right side of history, and like, when I do Jehovah's Witnesses, I learn more about it. When I engage in these, that's the whole reason I do. Literally every time someone's like, can you make a video on a cult? I'm usually just like, okay, here's what I know. Sometimes it's just, I literally just looked this up. Here's what I know. Come tell me your experience. And like, I'm going to learn.
Sharing space versus
I know a hell of a lot about Mormonism, but I still learn every time I'm speaking to like an ex-member or current member or whatever.
As you should, right? Yeah. Like, because you're taking in individual experiences. There should be, like, that's how I feel about almost every time I listen to a story time or something. I'm always just like, there's this, you just never know what you're going to get from another person. And I think that's what whiteness took away from white people, is this ability to see the abundance in opportunity in relationship by listening. But it's like you don't even get to the listening because there's this wall up of something of like that performance of it's the performance of the role of good person that you're separated your listening true self from your like whatever that is.
Well, it's like what we were talking about with the rap stuff, right? You know, like every time I say I'm about to get involved in like a black topic, right? White people around me are like, oh, watch out. And yeah, and then, like you said, I'm like, it's not like get mad and start like cussing people out, flinging around racial epithet, right? Like what am I watching out about that some people might be upset? Okay.
Like what has happened that white people are so afraid of? Because as far as I'm concerned, those who should be afraid are not the white people. Like, what have black people done? And you know, they go, imagine, oh, there was a black woman whisperer, and imagine. If it starts with imagine, one, it's already happening. Like, that's how we got here. And like, yeah, it'd be racist, probably. That's the whole thing, is that I'm talking about being, like, you know, there's just so many layers of defensive, like, callousness to get through. And white women don't have to deal with that. They try to build up the callousness after they realize you're on the wrong side, but it just doesn't work as well after that. You don't have to come on like that. And to take on this, don't try to be black, because you're white. That's why I told white women to do the ope.
This has even been interesting, you know, so I took one of my classes in my master's was on leadership, and the professor said, you know, very bold statement, which was like, yeah, you never have to argue ever. You just ask good questions, right? Like of the other person. And so, you know, one of the things I've started doing, right? Like so right now it's people with 7-day Adventism. Like, so makes it a cult. And I'm just like, before we start, I would like you to tell me what you think makes the Children of God a cult or Scientology, right? Like, pick an obvious cult and you define it for me, and then I'm going to show you a mirror, right?
Yeah,
because
don't make that. Don't do the work for them.
I know these things are the same, you know, but I don't need to like argue that. I can just ask you to tell me your definition and what you think. You know, we're all here in agreement. The Children of God was a cult.
Right.
So
if we're gonna say, yeah, it's not as bad as this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say, what's this? What's this? Let's start there. And in their explanation, we'll do the work for you. And that's why I try to get white women to slow down and ask, why am I talking? Because debunking is one of the D's I don't want you to do. Right. I'd rather you be than debunk. They're like, we got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would rather you do something that's reducing harm, or, you know, making people aware or showing empathy. But this like focus on showing how wrong someone is still doesn't make you do anything better.
Yeah, it's still that, as you say, the whiteness focus on like the anti-identity.
Yeah.
Or the like
you're like
that, and that's the other thing. It's like, I don't need to prove that this is a cult. Like, all I'm trying to do here is open up space for people to talk about it, you know, and like in this discussion, we're gonna have
convincing.
There's gonna be value in the discussion, you know. There's literally these titles, right? The title doesn't matter if like the group is the same.
Right. If you're looking for the definition and blah, 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 you're already on the wrong, we're not having the same conversation, you know, and that's kind of what happened with me critiquing John Brown as, you know, this abolitionist, and to have white men in 2023 or whatever year it was, yelling at me on the internet about what Harriet Tubman believed in the name of John Brown. I was like, so you want me to, like, I'm just gonna, you know, lay out what's currently happening, not so what no, I don't have to say so what you're saying is. I just have to be like, okay, so you want me to defend my critique, my Black woman ass critique, in the fact that you're yelling at, like, just the whole event of it all did it for me. But I know also that I have Black women, and there are people who, when you have community, you don't feel the need to show yourself every time and to perform for every single person to convince them that you're worth listening to. You already got people listening to you, and they're hilarious already.
I was going to say, and not to, belabor the point, but like, I feel comfortable to take on this conversation because I have a lot of Black people that follow me, because we've had a lot of discussions about Nation of Islam, because I have talked to so many survivors and like listened to their account, and I can draw the parallels.
Right.
Just to say
You
the
did
community,
work
right? Like,
right.
yeah, just to say the community. I didn't just like Google Black cults and
you didn't take one comment and
start
go,
calling things out.
Yeah, you didn't say one comment and go, sure. Which is what like a white man might do and go, I'm a cult scholar, and they say it's cool, and that's what we're talking about. You have the wherewithal to understand where you sit in it and what goes on. And so and people who follow you know that. And we can take in that context of the moment and go, it's not just random white lady talks about Nation of Islam. You're a cult scholar. You're in a cult. You talk to me every week. You have people that obviously you listen to before doing this because you're on the internet. Like, the community considers all of that. Doesn't just go, prove it to me. Like, that's also a waste of your time. That doesn't see you as a person who may have done this 1,000 times before. Look for the video that explains it.
I've started to do that too, where it's just like, if someone is, a lot of times I'll just see if they follow me before I even answer the comment, because it's like there's too many now that I'm having to pick and choose. And I know you at least have some context for me and who I am if you're already here following me, versus you just stumbled across this video.
Yeah, if someone, because that gives that whatever benefit of the doubt is, I will give that to someone, grace, if I see they're already following me. Now, sometimes they do that, but they're like 000, and they're following you just to watch. Rarely does that happen, though. But it's like, okay, if you want, listen, white women, if you want to know what I am saying, I want you to hear it. If you don't, I don't want that for you. What? Why would I want? It's like, I'm not.
Like, when people, do you have people stop by and criticize the crafting? Like, I have people. It was more when I was group behavior gal, but it's still surprising to me. I'm called knitting cult lady, and they'll show up and they'll be like, you have really good information, but the knitting is overwhelming. Like, maybe everything isn't for you. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like,
I'm sorry. Like, it's such a weird.
Oh my God. Put subtitles, right? Like, I do my part in case you want it, but it's like your thing you say where people are like, oh, well, I don't do page.
Yeah, like, I consider that consumer privilege. Like, that's to even say that shows that you're just like someone who consumes, and you don't like value any of the context of the work that has gone into this. To just point out something that it's and you, how do you prove to someone that they have consumer privilege? Oh, it's not really about that. It's like, oh, you just see me as an entertainment source. And I had someone say, I love, when they start with that, I love your content, but the moving around and long, I think I talked about this, silly long fingernails and finger wagging is really distracting. I said, did you confuse me with a book? Like, this is a TikTok page. You want something that sits still and you could just, I'm not a book. I hear you. That's it's distracting. This is a TikTok video. Like, you're distracted because you're on TikTok. Just the inconsideration. And I was like, you want a book, and that's fine. But don't come to a human person's TikTok page where they're sharing information with you about dehumanization. Like, but the finger, and there's racial microaggressions in there, and microaggressions is a word I don't love, but and
when I get is, oh, it's too much for my ADHD, or oh, this is too much for my, and I'm like, so you're calling on neurodiversity while you're trying to shame someone for their stimming? Really?
Yeah. Like, I tell you, the newly diagnosed neurodiverse white women are the least sufferable. They are insufferable. And I had a whole thing with them because when captions, so Elise Myers, who was very popular, I think she's back on TikTok, We're mutuals. So she made a video once saying, you know, if the least you can do is add captions, like everyone should do this, you should do this, you should do this. Like if you're a good person, you should be adding captions, right? But at that time, especially, you know, talking about certain things online, especially as a Black person, you would censor yourself and adding captions. Also, this like the dexterity issues and stuff of adding captions. I don't think anyone should say 100% across the board, everyone should do something. So I stitched that to say that. Oh my goodness. So what you're saying is, and just like the borrowed outrage for people didn't even need captions. And like that became a whole thing, especially like on duets, they wouldn't appear, but everyone would find a Black woman and yell at her about captions. But also realizing that when I tell white women, like, you know, just listening and not, you know, try to appreciate instead of relate, right? Don't relate, appreciate. But my ADHD, I could never, like, I can't just listen to when someone talks. And this is where you're including and ignoring at the same time, because who are you talking to? Have you seen any of my videos? Have I finished one sentence? Like you know, they don't see me as potentially a person who understands what you're saying. That's why I came up with a list of things, because I understand that this is hard. And I see that. So I made a list that said, you know, instead of telling a relatable story, I suggest you don't. All right. And just recently, Hannah Berner, who's a white woman comedian, was on the interview carpet with Meg Thee Stallion and told Meg Thee Stallion, I love your music so much. And and this other girl, it makes me, you know, I'm so excited. It makes me want to fight. And Meg Thee Stallion was like, you mean put that fighting stuff down and look good, right? Because Meg Thee Stallion specifically has talked many times about not being a fighter. She actually doesn't fight. A lot of her music is like, I'm anxious. I wish I had my parents, but it's rap, right? So there's some microaggression, macroaggression, some stuff in there, right? Of this white woman being like, your music makes me want to fight. And Black people are like, what? And now we play some of the songs and go, this doesn't make any sense. And this is where all I was saying was, see, had you just appreciated and not tried to relate, you could have avoided this. I'm trying to help. And white women see it as a condemnation or a silencing. Why would I be talking to you if all I wanted to do was make you feel bad? See, that's white men. Oh, see, that's whiteness. I'm realizing that because you're used, that happens so often where people want to be around white. Oh, I just connected that, you know, like white people hated Black people, right? But needed them in their house, making their bed, warming their bed, making their food. You hated people and needed them. That's narcissism. That's like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not trying to talk to white women because I want to make them feel bad. What a terrible time. Like that's decentering white women means I hate white women. No, I'm decentering how your role, the fake fragility, the bomb fragility, you know, that is so interesting. But it's like,
I think that the being newly neurodivergent is like a good analogy for people. You know, like when I found out that I was ADHD, right? And like I starting to go through my own 2 years of like, is this for real, right?
Yeah.
And every new thing I would find out, I would come to my spouse and be like, hey, did you know? And he'd be like, yeah, I know you do that. You know, and it's just like after a while, it was like, just because I don't understand my whiteness, my internalized racism, like the way I'm coming off when I'm coming off that way, doesn't mean everyone else doesn't. You know, I had this other experience when I was a captain in the Army, and I thought back about my briefs as a new lieutenant. And I was like, now that I know what I'm doing, it was so obvious that I didn't know what I was doing, and everyone around me knew that except me, right? Like I was so sincere and so, I call it the evangelizing phase now. Like when you find out a new thing and then you have to go like tell everyone about it and like convince them that it's right and all this stuff that you're learning.
And there's community to be found there with white women, because we're not in that. We're, you know, and the Black women come in that font, you know, but mental health and anything medical is we can't relate really. You know, when white women talk about autism, because some of your stuff is still rooted in whiteness. You still got some of the social stuff and the cues, and I didn't understand this. Well, that didn't make sense because that was based on whiteness. That has nothing to do with your autism. And you not understanding when I said no, that has nothing to, because white women love to tell me about their autism after I go, who are you talking to?
Or
Because
their sense of, we love to say how like the sense of social justice,
yeah,
like the sense of, it's a sense of fairness. It does not mean you know anything about social justice.
fairness is interesting as of a word, right? Fairness. And how fair everything is, and your fair skin and your fair. Shut up. It's not about that. This isn't a melting pot. We're all just people. Like, you're not the parents disseminating out equal rights to everybody. Like, at some point, there has to be that acknowledgement. And I think we're getting there. But it's, it's trying not to demonize people who do wrong things. That's in that whiteness, and thinking that that's going to happen to you if you do something wrong.
Yeah, and I think part of this is like, cult scholars will talk about how like all members in cults are perpetrators, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Ooh,
have to be
yeah.
in order to be supporting that system.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I kind of found a similar thing once I deconstructed my army experience and being like, well, now that I've acknowledged and written a whole book on how toxic the US Army is, like, I feel a little less proud of my accomplishments, right? Like, I also have to acknowledge that I benefited from a toxic system that harms people. And I feel like that is what is really hard for people, is that, like, once you unpack, or like just now that I know all the things not to say to Black women, I was saying them for a while, right? So
Right.
like, like I learned not to take up the whole sidewalk and crash into Black women, but I was doing it for a bunch of time, right? And so it is embarrassing, it's shameful, but that's where I feel like you can just decide not to get stuck in the shame.
Right, because it happened already. And I get that. We get those cringe moments. You're going to bed and you think about that time where blah 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 blah. That isn't happening right now. It feels that way, but you distance yourself from it. The fact that
like,
you know now is that you could have not known. You could still be doing it. And you could be defending and yelling at a Black woman to try and explain how she misunderstood.
Correct. And
Every
I feel
time.
like, too, like, this is why we all make fun of lieutenants, right? Like, this is, everyone gets that, like, the new
Which
person.
Which lieutenant? Like,
it's just like a brand new officer. So, like, a private or a lieutenant, right? But, like, once you are not a lieutenant rank anymore, everyone makes fun of lieutenants. And it's because of exactly that, right? Because you're so, like, earnest, but you don't know anything. You've been told you have a bunch of responsibility. It's not really true. And it's just funny. And it's like you spend the whole time that you're a lieutenant being so mad that everyone's making fun of you. And then later when you know what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's like, that's the...
And it's
It just
okay,
keeps you
right? And it's
focused.
like, you just move on.
Yeah. Did you see, I know this is weird, but we were talking about the Faces on Mountains, right? And I just was watching a Paul Mooney movie from like 2000, maybe it's a stand-up, not sure, Analyzing White America from 2002. Anyway, and he mentions like, oh, they hate paint on walls and graffiti, but then they put their faces in a mountain. And I was like, wait, yes, that just pissed me off, right? Because graffiti can be so many things. It could be beautiful, obviously, and they're gonna put faces on mountains and be like, this is what you want to see. Like these four faces? I don't know, doesn't matter. But and we were talking about like going up to space, and it feels like these faces are like their ways of being like, this is where we're going. And then I saw a video from a woman who used to work at NASA who said she'd been censored, or like how gross the space shuttle is. It is sticky. You can't clean it, and then while you're up there, you can't open a window, right? And she was like, there's like pubes floating around, and like the sweat is then reused, and like pee is like reused, but the walls are gross and it smells. They have to take all these antihistamines to go up there because it's the germs, poop, the toilet's always broken because you can't fix things. And of course, because it's like white people doing white people stuff. If you think about it, of course, they went to colonize space and they did it with germs. Of course.
Have you heard of the thing where, like, Americans spent however many millions of dollars to create a pen that could write in no gravity, and the Russian cosmonauts just used a pencil?
But that sounds so American. And I do remember the giving 100 tampons to a woman who was going to space for 6 days, and they were like, yeah.
And it's
But
so funny because even when I bring this up about how ridiculous this is, then people go, well, you know, they get stuck up there, so that would be smart. And I'm like, and so having more tampons than you have food and water supplies, not going to help you.
Anything to just not listen to the point. That's white, whatever that is. That, like, that and like the rhetorical questions. Something there where, like, what so are you saying?
Well, so you're saying?
So you're saying
I trust my words carefully.
It's like, what, why? And that's with the hair thing. That's when I started saying, like, white people shouldn't ask rhetorical questions, because it's actually really, they're not, I don't think you use them right. Like, who does this? I just told you of 3 people who do this. Who does this anymore? You know, the answers are racism, probably, most of the time. And you. Or, I don't know. But we should be asking more questions that make sense. You know, space. Also, the Challenger is so American. I remember being like, America is like Ted Bundy and the Challenger, and we don't learn from anything. We learn about it, and then we're like, and then the next thing. So you had kids watching, and a teacher live thought this couldn't go. How many ways can something be obviously avoidable like the trauma? Because they had the kids shipped there and it was on TV and they watched it in class, and we just moved right past that. And then those kids raise people and we have to go to school with them. But it's like, just to get a date, to hit the date, to do it faster than, to have the ends. The ends justify the means. Nope. Stop romanticizing the ends, I've decided also. Because what do you mean? Well, we got to space first. Did we?
But yeah.
Did we need to? I really just meant, like, did we need to? I don't, because I don't even care. I don't even care if it's true.
I just think it's just space travel. All cults promise space travel, and this became such an important thing. But like you were saying, like, about romanticizing, right? Yeah. Like, I always say, like, even if you get true love, right? Even if you are one of the people that gets true love, that gets a soulmate, true love ends in death or disaster.
Yeah.
Right?
Happily
like,
ever after
doesn't end in happiness. It ends with one of you dying first.
That's right? Future faking. They have been future faking. This is a narcissism, if I've ever heard of one. Happily ever after. No one ever. Who has experienced that? And then these words happened, and everything's fine. Don't ask any questions. And then racism was over because we wrote it down on paper. And romanticizing comes from romance, which comes from Rome. And the Romans didn't do a great job. I don't know much about the Romans. I'm not from Rome. There's a whole trending sound. And they say from Rome, talking about the Roman salute. They're saying that Elon Musk was doing a Roman salute. And they're like, that bitch not from Rome. He's not Roman. And neither are we. Why are we seeking, what is romance? Manipulation. To me, it sounds like making the action someone takes when they want you. When they want me. Want me to what? You know, colonize. They want to colonize you, and I like to go back to the original questions when I start writing it out. I'm like, Roman, the Roman Empire.
Speaking of the Romans, which just turned into the British, of course. I like to say that the history of colonization is just white men going around the world telling black and brown women to cover up their tits. Yeah. Because I think it's because you can't say anything to a woman when she has her tits out. Like, we feel very powerful and confident. And
I remember reading something. It was like they went to Africa, and because of the heat, they weren't wearing that many clothes. And then these white men were like, "Whoa, they are so promiscuous, and that's where they got all of their." But it was hot. It's hot. Why would we wear clothes if it's hot?
yeah,
And
they go to Africa and Latin America and
they probably
India and
smelled
label
so
them,
bad.
and not only did they label them as promiscuous, but like the missionaries would dress according to British seasons. So they would wear full on jackets and shit in the tropics.
And then but here's the thing is that in whiteness, and when you learn about this, you're not thinking about the perspective, you're not identifying with the Africans. I laugh because I'm identifying with the Africans who look at these people. Well, we're with this other country, so we're gonna dress. It's hot. You smell. Take off your jacket. And that's because you're better than me. I'm sorry.
Like,
No.
I look at the Children of God and the Mormons, and I'm like, at least we got one thing right, which was we dressed like the countries that we were in.
It's, and it's like
walk around in button-down t-shirts and a tie when it's like
the whiteness.
90 degrees and a humidity point of 100.
And my mom used to always talk about, in the Orthodox Jews walk around because she's Jewish, but she just could not get with that. When she gets hot, she gets overstimulated. She talk about this time she took her jacket off in yeshiva and everyone shoulders. She had shoulders under that jacket. And we used to just like, to a certain degree, literally, it's like, I know y'all are hot. Y'all are hot. And you're not better because you're suffering.
Right. So this is something I try to explain to white people, that I'm like, I know that heat sucks, but you're not supposed to be in heat trying not to sweat. You're supposed to be in heat eating spicy food and sweating more because that's what keeps you cool.
Interesting. Right, but it's also that comfort seeking, the like easiness.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. I make fun of my husband for this all the time because like his one requirement when we travel is we have to have air conditioning. And I'm always telling him that I'm like, the places that don't have air conditioning usually don't need air conditioning for a lot of stuff. But a lot of it is you just have to get used to being there and living like this, right? So for me, I'm super temperature sensitive, either hot or cold. But because I grew up in South America, give me like a day, and I've just clicked into being hot. Brazilians take literally 3 showers a day. Wearing clothes that are loose and cover you from sun, right? Different things like that. And it's like, things like understanding, like sweating cools you down. Like this is what your body is supposed to do in this situation, but you're trying to avoid the conflict.
You can't control for everything. But in America, we're like, well, we'll build these really, it's just crazy. And then, we talk about huts don't need air.
So in Brazil, right, where it's 80, 90 degrees, people hang out outside. And in Texas, they just freeze every building to be like 55 degrees to try to like undo the heat outside. It drives me bonkers.
Like, tell me more. You're not supposed to be here. Like, just it shouldn't be this hard to live. It shouldn't take up this much energy. And they say that this is better somehow.
I literally used to have to carry a jacket around in spring and fall and summer in Texas just to be inside in class. Like, and why? Then it's like, why am I
you're not allowed to
tank
complain.
Top and a jean skirt carrying a jacket around?
So much to do it.
So much.
And so, like, you can't complain. I mean, you can, but it's like, what is this? This doesn't make sense. And it also is, it's like gaslighting internally. Right? You're like not trusting your body at all. At all. You're like, I need this machine pumping out cold. And we're all...
Here's one that you'll love, is that in the military, I don't even think it's the base commander. Someone decides when the air conditioning goes on and off. And it is not based on like what is going on. It's based on a date that has been decided. And it's like one date for most of the country. And it's just like,
What?
It's so bonkers. So
We're paying.
you're always like sweating in April and freezing in October, and it's just ludicrous.
You know, and we just like are like the military. Like it's just we need this. We need this functionality because if we didn't have this, we'd all be making decisions for ourselves. Like that's,
I think it's that too that bothers me, right? Like when I was saying, like in places that don't have air conditioning, you don't need air conditioning. People would be like, "Oh, well, you do need it." And it's like, no, they just live in a different way, right? Like we don't spend enough time thinking about what air conditioning has changed for us. I literally think it has impacted our sense of community because when it's too hot, you're inside instead of outside, hanging out in the shady areas, dancing and eating ice cream. You're like
and
inside
like
your house with air conditioning.
Sweating is for people who try hard or who are like exerting a lot of effort. And delicate people don't do that. Like they don't sweat. They don't have sweat stains. That's for the working class. I've heard this phrase recently. I've heard it, but I don't know if it's just European. But like as opposed to the ruling class, is that the other one?
Yes.
I'm just now realizing. I was just like, what's the working class? Because people say it right now. I heard someone like just talking about India and Britain, and he said something that I didn't like. The advantages of living in the UK versus the US. I was like, how we get in it? He's from India talking about the UK. How I know it's better than the Anyway. But then he was like, I need working class Brits to know they don't like you either, right? And working class. But then who's lazy? If there is a working class, that confuses me so much, and it's how you're still using that language and you don't hear. I mean, I just deconstructed, but like ruling class, were there more? Because I really thought there was no other. The working class, the ruling class, and then also the word class. I wonder how we got that so much. Like classes, we're going to our classes. Like we don't have that system, but it is, it's just a different kind of caste. But so is working only for some? And they're admitting that? It's very confusing. The gaslighting is really gaslighting, and that's very European for them to be like, it's so much better. Because racism is so bad in America.
It's so much better. And you were saying like, oh, like sweat stains aren't bad. And it's like, well, one, sweat stains aren't bad. And two, like you wear white linen dresses and stuff, and then you don't have to deal with the sweat stain. Like you just wear clothes that don't show sweat stains. Like
you accommodate, you adapt. You say, I'm gonna sweat. So what will I now? Instead of saying, this is what's on trend, so this is what I have to wear, and now I have to make my body get into that, fit that, and stay like that all the time. Versus like, okay, what's me? What am I feeling today? What will make this the easiest? When I went to Thailand, it was so hot. And I just had a bunch of like flowy one-piece outfits and then accommodated. I have never sweat so much, but it didn't bother me where it would bother me
because you were
in
in
a pantsuit.
Thailand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But like if I'm in a pantsuit and I'm sweating, I guess I'll be a little bit more crotchety. And you've got a lot more concerns going if you're sweating and you can see it in your suit. What does that mean?
Well, it means you're working class.
You can't sweat in a suit. You're working, like the working class thing. I don't know. And like England they have no idea what they sound like, I guess, maybe. Because they really think they're much better. I guess they have healthcare. So
I mean,
okay, you have healthcare.
They
Good
call
for
themselves Great Britain. I've seen Trevor Noah's bit on that.
No, I know, but you're right.
He's like
so many names.
A British. He does a British guy arriving in India, telling them he's from Great Britain.
Great Britain.
Okay, well then, welcome to Great India. He's like, no, you can't call yourself.
Right? Oh,
but even this, right? I always say so. Like when you put the in the title, little bit culty. And I tell you what, I have worked with the Five Eyes, which is the 5 Western white English speaking nations of the 5, the United States and the UK are definitely more culty than the Canada, the Australia, and the New Zealand.
Ooh, that's so interesting. Because when I just was thinking also the United Kingdom, and you know how I feel about the United States. What do you mean? You can't just say it's united. It's united.
But
It's
also
one thing.
you're the only one. You're the only
The
states or
the
kingdom that have ever united.
the 50 states of you divided it into and then United Kingdom. I didn't even think about, because also how many names do you need? In Britain and Great Britain and England and the United Kingdom, it's this big. It's this big. It's not that great.
This is why, as the cult, you have to keep rebranding, you know, and I always say, like, I don't do cult
changing their
rebranding, you
names.
know, like, Amy Coney Barrett is in a cult called People of Praise. It's like a Catholic evangelical cult, and they used to be called Handmaids. And after the show came out, they like changed it, and people keep trying to tell me that, and I'm like, no, I don't care. Like, the children of God hasn't been called the children of God since before I was born. Like,
The
I don't. The
rebranding.
rebranding is just about hiding, right? It's the whiteout. It's just the whiteout. Like,
That's what
it's
I
the
was just like.
same thing. Yeah.
It's the amendments, it's the street name changing, it's anything but doing something, right? They just rebrand. All right, Diddy, Puff Daddy, Puffy Diddy, Brother Love. Like, let's say, you know, people change their names. The family, then how many families? You know, there's all these cults, they change their names. Changing your name. But if you believe that what you are, what you do, and how you perform, then a new name, I'm a new business. And narcissists, like I said, like, I don't know who that was. That was, or people apologizing on the internet. I don't know who that person was all those years ago. I don't even see myself. That was you. It's okay to still be you, but to distance yourself from your own being is not a sign that you are an authentic, like, individual who can be trusted.
And also, and I think maybe a good place to wrap this up today, like, if you did the work to not be that person anymore, then you know who that was, and you know what your path was, and you can talk about that and acknowledge that. Like,
if you have to say it, you ain't it. I would say that, like, the whole, like, when certain things, if you have to say it, you know, it's innocent until proven guilty. I think now I'm, you know, there's certain things you don't have to say. It's like the defending thing. I'm not going to tell you I'm smart. Once I realized I had to say that to my boss, I started to realize, I'm like, something's wrong here. I have never had to tell someone I'm smart. Like, I know things. I know how to write emails, sir. And that's like, something's wrong here. Because I literally, it's like, I just had that. I knew that thing. It feels like when women say, at least he didn't cheat, at least he didn't cheat until he cheats. Then they're like, that's enough. I have to leave. Smart was the thing I had. Okay. And people didn't like me, but I was smart. And despite everything else, in terms of, like, I could follow the rules and I knew how to answer tests and stuff. Not like actually inherently better in any way. But
I feel like this is like the late diagnosed neurodivergent woman. Like, people didn't like me. I was smart.
But I knew that you couldn't be mad at 100% dad, you know? So it was kind of like that thing. So once I realized I had to explain to someone that I was smart, I was like, something's wrong here. And that's unfortunate, but that's what gaslighting does.
I keep telling people, because people keep talking about, you know, RFK's thing of, like, putting neurodivergent people in camps. And I'm just like, can you imagine the shenanigans that late diagnosed autistic women would run in your camps? Like,
I know.
I dare you, camp? Sir. I dare you. Like, all of the things that we know with all of our crazy interests.
Right. And all of the things they want are like things of the past that we've already heard. Like, they're not even entertaining. So, like, I think, have fun with it. We get to go to camp because
people are like, they say that to me, and I'm like, I grew up in a labor camp. Like, alternately, I call it religious prison camp. But, like, you know, like, I've done this. Like, I can take RFK better than he could take me. Like, let's go.
And, like, call the bluff. He's just everyone now has to listen to him because he said the blacks, blah, blah, blah. All I know is he said something about the blacks.
Well, I mean, this is another thing I say when people are like, okay, so what if this, what if that? And I'm just like, think of the logistics. Think of the logistics of putting 10% of Americans in camps.
Like, give it a couple extra thoughts and go, what's the likelihood? And what if something else? Like, move the Overton window a little bit over to the, like, what if people had something they actually cared about? They would abandon this thing if they were given a better option. People like to go where they're going to enjoy themselves more. But you keep giving them only terrible options.
Party room. Got to go to the party room.
Yeah.
Yep.
The part that's bumping back there. They'll go there. You'd be like, the right room. The correct room. Great.
This is what I put on my threads after we had the conversation about the knitter word. And I said, I just found out that some Black people get a little triggered by white people saying this word. And you know what? It's almost just as easy to say fiber arts. We don't need that knitting supremacy. Like, we're just trying to have a fiber arts party over here.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. It's inclusive. It centers. I didn't even think about it that way until people were kind of responding to my video. Like, oh, and it includes more people. And it makes me feel like I'm the center of the thing, not the thing I'm making. I'm the fiber artist. I'm working with some stuff. Not like, because I never even liked, what are you making? What are you making? What are you making? It's not really about that, because I don't know. I'm just stimming. I'm just having a good time, and I'm learning how to do it without looking, and I'm feeling really excited about that. You know, so it's like, that's community, is putting an idea out there, like you said, like, this is what I know. And I said, this is what I know. I know that I hear that weird, that hard R in knitter. And that's all I know. And then I found out all these other things, and fiber artists, and like, look at that. It could be that easy.
Literally, I put that on my page and people were getting all mad. I was just like, I didn't even look at the comments one time. After the first time, I was just like, nope, I don't care. Like, I've given you an option. Now I'm going to be at the fiber arts party. Like, come join us or stay over here arguing.
Yeah, you could just pretend
that's what I put. I was like, the other side is like, F your pronouns. Meanwhile, we're over here just trying to have a fiber arts party.
We're just like, what are you bringing?
We can just be. I've always thought this. I was like, literally, like, if someone said, how people hate the word moist.
Right.
And if I was in like a relationship or a friendship with someone that I knew hated that word, I would try to not say the word around them. Like,
right.
To me, this has always just been so easy of like, we could just be respectful.
Yeah,
like, that doesn't mean we can't have conflict, right? But we can be respectful of each other all the time. And I think that's what is important in the end.
Right. It's just consideration. That's it. Just consideration. You don't have to do anything. But
just listen.
It's easy enough to just listen. No proof.
Just listen. Speaking of listening, please find Rebecca on her Patreon, White Woman Whisperer. She writes really, really good stuff, including the end of my next book, The Culting of America. Her links will be in the description, as will the link for the fundraiser for Culting of America, if you are interested in donating to that process, coming very soon, I hope. The link for the fundraiser will be there. We've already raised $3,000, which just covers the audiobook. So there will be an audiobook. And like and subscribe our channel. Thank you so much.